The words were gone. Ella Fitzgerald stood in the light of a full concert hall, her mouth half open, and where the next line of the song should have been, there was nothing at all. The band kept playing beneath her, patient, unaware, waiting for a voice that had suddenly forgotten how to arrive. For most singers, this is a small nightmare. For Ella Fitzgerald, the woman they called the First Lady of Song, the woman whose memory for a melody was supposed to be flawless, it was something close to the end of the world. 1 second passed, then 2. In a room of 1,000 people, 2 seconds of silence is a very long time. And standing at the microphone beside her, close enough to touch, was Louis Armstrong. He had heard the silence too. He always heard everything. The trumpet in his hand, the handkerchief in his fist, the broad, familiar smile still on his face, and behind that smile, a mind moving faster than the beat. He had maybe 3 seconds to decide what kind of night this was going to be. 3 seconds is nothing. It is the space between 2 breaths. But on a live stage, in front of a paying crowd, 3 seconds is enough time for a career of perfect nights to be remembered instead for one that came apart. Ella felt it. Louis felt it. And somewhere out in the dark, the first few listeners were just beginning to sense that the easy rhythm of the evening had caught on something. This is the story of what he chose in those 3 seconds, and why Ella Fitzgerald never forgot it. Louis Armstrong was more than 50 years old by then, and the man standing beside Ella that night was not the hungry boy who once left New Orleans with a cornet and almost nothing else. He had crossed the world by that point. He had played for crowds who did not share his language, been called an ambassador of a music that was born in the poorest streets of America, and carried that music into rooms that had never let a man like him through the front door. The smile everyone knew was real. The warmth was real. But people who worked beside him understood something the audiences rarely saw. Behind the laughter was one of the most disciplined craftsmen in all of music. Louis Armstrong listened. He listened the way a surgeon watches, the way a card player watches, always a half step ahead of the room. He knew how a phrase was supposed to land. He knew when a band was rushing, when a tempo was dragging, when a singer was about to reach for a breath. And he knew, better than almost anyone alive, how much courage it took to stand alone in a spotlight and be perfect on command. He had built an entire life on staying calm in the one place most people came apart. So when the silence opened beside him that night, he did not freeze the way 1,000 people in the dark were beginning to freeze. He simply listened, and he understood exactly what was happening. He had seen this before, in himself and in others. He had stood in rooms where a musician lost the thread, and the whole band held its breath. He remembered the early years, the rough dance halls and riverboats, where a young player learned fast that the show never stopped for anyone, that you carried each other or you sank together. Those lessons never left him. Decades later, in a grand concert hall, a world away from those beginnings, they were about to matter more than anyone in the seats would ever know. To understand that silence, you have to understand the world it happened in. This was the middle of the 1950s, a golden stretch when American music filled theaters, ballrooms, and radios from coast to coast. Ella Fitzgerald and Louis Armstrong had begun singing together, 2 of the most beloved voices of the century, placed side by side, and audiences came from everywhere to see it happen in the same room. But a live concert in those years was not like anything a modern listener knows. There was no second take. There was no editing booth waiting to fix a mistake later. Whatever happened on that stage happened once, in front of everyone, and then it was gone into memory forever. A singer who stumbled did not get to try again. The moment simply belonged to history exactly as it fell. That is what made these nights so alive and so dangerous. Every performer who walked into that light carried the same private knowledge. There was nowhere to hide up there. The band could cover a wrong note. The lights could soften a tired face. But when a voice reached for a lyric and found nothing, the whole room felt the floor drop out at the same instant. And on this particular night, in front of a sold-out house that had paid to hear two legends at the height of their powers, that was exactly what was beginning to happen. The duet had started the way these things always did, easy and bright. The two of them traded lines back and forth, Ella's silk against Louis's gravel, and the audience settled into that warm, familiar pleasure of watching two masters play. The song was a light one, the kind built to feel like a conversation between old friends, a melody the whole hall could almost hum along to. Ella carried the verse forward, her phrasing perfect, her timing exact, and no one in that theater had the smallest reason to expect anything but ease. Then came the turn. Somewhere in the middle of the song, the next line simply was not there. Maybe it was the long day of travel. Maybe it was a lyric she had sung 100 different ways in 100 different cities until the versions blurred together. It does not matter why. What matters is the instant it happened. Her eyes changed first. The professional calm held on her face, but something behind it flickered, a small, private alarm that only the people closest to her could read. The melody rolled on beneath her feet, indifferent, and the empty space where her voice belonged began to widen. The audience had not caught it yet, but it was coming. You could almost trace it moving through the hall, row by row, the way a chill moves across water. A few faces near the front had already tilted, sensing the hesitation before they could name it. The band, reading only the chart in front of them, kept the tempo rolling forward, indifferent to the woman who had lost her way above it. One more beat of silence, and 1,000 people would understand together that something had gone wrong. And that is the exact moment Louis Armstrong stepped into. And Ella Fitzgerald was no ordinary singer to be standing beside. She had come up hard, an orphaned girl who slept rough on the streets of Harlem before a talent night at a theater changed everything. What poured out of her once she found a microphone was almost impossible to explain. Her voice was clean and effortless and endless, a sound so pure that other singers would stop and simply shake their heads. They called her the First Lady of Song, and the title was not flattery. Musicians trusted her ear more than their own. Her memory for a melody, for the exact turn of a lyric, was famous throughout the whole profession. Which is precisely why what was happening that night mattered so much. Ella Fitzgerald was not a careless performer who lost her place. She was the most reliable voice in American music, and reliability was the very heart of who she believed herself to be. But beneath that flawless surface lived a shyness the public never fully saw. She carried a quiet fear of the very stages that made her immortal. She hated to disappoint. She hated, more than anything, the idea of letting an audience down. So when the words slipped out of her reach in front of 1,000 people, it was not just a lyric she was losing. For one terrible moment, it was the whole picture of herself, the flawless one, coming apart in the light. What happened next was the part neither of them could have rehearsed. Ella heard him. Of course she heard him. She had the fastest ear in the business, And the moment that gravel voice reached her, she understood exactly what he was doing and why. And she answered. She caught the thread he had thrown her, took the nonsense sound and made it music, and suddenly the two of them were trading again, riffing on the very gap that a heartbeat earlier had threatened to swallow her whole. The mistake did not just vanish. It turned into something better than the song had been before. The two greatest voices of their generation were now improvising in the open air of a live stage, chasing each other through a melody neither of them was reading anymore, and the audience felt the temperature of the room change. People leaned forward. People began to laugh, then to grin, then to break into that particular kind of applause that comes when a crowd knows it is watching something that will never happen exactly this way again. They thought they were seeing two legends play. They had no idea they were watching one of them quietly rescue the other in real time, in front of them all, without a single person noticing the danger. The song ended bigger than it began, and for one unrepeatable minute, a small disaster had been turned right there in the light into the warmest moment of the whole night. He had a choice, and he had almost no time to make it. He could have done nothing. He could have let the moment fall the way an honest mistake falls, and the audience would have forgiven her, because audiences always forgave Ella Fitzgerald. He could have looked away to spare her the sense of being watched in her worst second. Or he could do the hardest thing of all, the thing that only a performer of his exact instincts could pull off. He could step inside the mistake and make it disappear before anyone knew it was there. Louis Armstrong chose the last one. In the space of a single beat, faster than thought, he leaned toward the microphone and let that unmistakable gravel voice roll out into the hall, filling the gap she had left. It was not the right lyric. It may not have been any real lyric at all. He growled, he improvised, he wrapped a warm nonsense of sound around the melody and carried it forward as if this had been the plan the whole time. And here was the genius of it. He did it smiling. He did it with a wink in his voice, so that the whole thing sounded not like a rescue, but like a joke between two friends, a bit of play the audience had been lucky enough to catch. To the 1,000 people in the dark, nothing had gone wrong at all. To the one woman beside him, everything had just been saved. When the set was over, the audience filed out into the night, believing they had simply seen a wonderful show. They talked about the playfulness of it, the way the two of them had seemed to invent that duet on the spot. They were right, though not in the way they imagined. Because the people who worked those stages, the musicians and the crew who stood in the wings, knew what they had really watched. They knew a singer had faltered in the one place she feared most, and that the man beside her had stepped in so gently and so fast that her stumble became her triumph instead. That was the truth about Louis Armstrong that the smiling photographs never quite told. His kindness was not soft. It was quick. It was skilled. It was the kindness of a man who had spent a lifetime learning exactly how to hold up the people beside him. People loved to reduce him to the grin and the handkerchief, to the easy joy he handed out night after night. But the grin was the surface of something far deeper, a discipline forged in hard years, a watchfulness that never rested even when the whole room believed he was only having fun. He had learned long ago that the greatest thing a performer could do was make the difficult look effortless and make the frightened feel safe. Ella Fitzgerald carried that night with her for the rest of her life. She spoke for years afterward about how much she loved to sing with him, about how safe she felt at his side. And anyone who understood what safety meant to a performer as exposed as she was, knew the full weight of that word. The world remembers them as two golden voices, frozen together on old recordings. But the real story lives in the gaps between the notes, in the 3 seconds when everything could have gone wrong. 1,000 people saw two legends sing that night. Only one of them knew she had been caught, in the light, by a friend who would never let her fall. And that is why she never forgot it.